Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. My name is Richard Long. I am the Executive Director of the Learning First Alliance, and we're very pleased today to have this session, webinar, that will focus in on an incredibly important topic, something that is core to what we are all trying to achieve, but sometimes we need to be reminded. And in this title, that the editor, Joseph P. Bishop, of the co-founder of the Center for Transformation of Schools at UCLA's School of Education and Information Studies, has brought together some of the foremost writers and leaders in the United States to talk about the need for us to redouble, increase, and change our behaviors, activities, and expectations so that all children become effective learners. Through this webinar today, you're going to have several questions, and towards the end, we'll have a few moments to reflect on those questions, but please put them into the chat. Joe Bishop is an extraordinary researcher and writer and has created this transformational center that is something that reflects very much in what Becky Pringle often talks about. The need for all of us to keep our eyes on and in our hearts and minds, both the teachers and the learners, that this is an interactive, dynamic relationship in which all benefit when all are able to work in a cooperative way. Joe has brought this book together with many different writers and chapters. And I think as you flip through this, you will find that you will be captivated by both the writing and the content. And one other thing I think we should share about Joe, and that is he is a father. He not only is he doing all of this writing and research to help all of us, to help our kids, but he is doing this to help his kids as well. Joe, thank you for your time and energy in putting this webinar together.
Thank you, Dr. Long, for the opportunity. Thank you, Rich. Really appreciate you. And I want to thank the Learning First Alliance members and educators on this webinar right now for tuning in. I actually want to start to take a moment of silence to be present with the victims of yesterday's events in Nashville, especially the students, families, and educators who are trying to make sense of what to do today and in the coming weeks. So last week, we actually hosted a conversation around school and community safety as a chapter, part of my new book, which Rich mentioned. The name of the book is Our Children Can't Wait, The Urgency of Reinventing Education Policy in America. And the foreword of the book is written by one of my favorite people on the planet who's on this call, Becky Pringle, President of the National Education Association. Becky, it's great to see you. And you're going to hear more from Becky momentarily. But what I want you to take away from this book is it's really a roadmap for our country, redefining the power and promise of education policy. And if you like what you hear today, I have to ask, but please purchase the book on Amazon or Teachers College Press, online. And if you have your phone out now and you're multitasking, that's okay, because we all have to do this sometimes. Please follow Our Children Can't Wait, the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And each chapter, so there's 16 chapters of the book, has one or two episodes, podcast episodes as a companion. New episodes are coming out every Wednesday between now and the end of the school year. So another one will come out tomorrow. So let's get to the agenda, though, and the actual slide deck. And I'd like to actually start off today, before we get to our other presenters, with a story. Next slide. Terrific. Okay, so Sean, a month before the height of the pandemic, I was doing an interview. I found myself sitting in a mustard yellow classroom chair on the top floor of a drop-in center in Los Angeles for unhoused youth. I looked across the table at a young man in his early 20s. His name was Sean. Sean identified as Latino. And Sean and I met after his long hour-and-a-half commute across LA by bus early in the morning. Sean shared with me that he had attended several school districts in LA County and countless schools before he just stopped going to school. And when we talked about his education history, it always sticks with me. But he said, when I asked him to describe his educational experience, he said, Joe, I felt like I was uncared for, like I was overlooked and uncared for. But what he said was very specifically, Joe, I felt like I was passing through. I felt like I was passing through. Sean's passing through reflects structural challenges in our society, many issues that we documented in a report at UCLA in our center report. I co-author called State of Crisis, Dismantling Student Homelessness in California. In that report, we sounded the alarm on the fact that you could fill Dodger Stadium to capacity five times over, with the number of young people unhoused. And nationally, over 1.1 million people are housing insecure. We know those numbers are likely much higher because of the pandemic. And these realities, like the realities of Sean that I mentioned, have come to define life in America for many youth across the U.S., especially young people of color, who are vastly overrepresented for students experiencing homelessness or impacted by the child welfare and justice systems. So I want to be clear here, though, as talking to an audience of educators, and I think you all will agree, schools have a clear responsibility to play in the justice equation to support students. We all know schools cannot tackle inherited inequities alone, yet we expect students to leave their challenges neatly outside the schoolhouse door. And historically, policies have too often codified racist ideologies and hierarchies, not to harmful systems of white supremacy. And I believe together, all of us on this call can build policy systems that center on youth, families, and justice. And I would say we are well on our way, thanks to the membership of organizations here today from the Learning First Alliance and many of the people on this call, but we are still early in this journey. The fragility of our democracy, our public education system as a whole in our country is abundantly clear, as we're reminded time and time again, even after yesterday's tragic killings, and even how we're talking about the events that happened yesterday in Nashville. Next slide, please. So I want you to take a deep breath with me. And I want you to imagine, for our young people, for our students, a fundamentally different way of thinking about policy. Next slide, please. Built on the expertise of community partners. And I'm going to give you a radical idea here. Students and educators being partners in policy. Next slide, please. Policies that are about ecosystems of care that acknowledge the clear evidence, the out-of-school factors like housing. Next slide, please. Healthcare. Next slide, please. Air quality. Next slide, please. And neighborhood conditions actually are more predictive of student achievement than in-school factors like the curriculum, the quality of a teacher, or assessment systems. And failure to prioritize prevention and upstream investments in out-of-school factors, like the ones you see defined by David Berliner at Arizona State on this slide, have elongated a legacy of radically different opportunities for Black, Brown, and Native communities in our country. And tragically, in some instances, has resulted in youth being incarcerated, which is our version of modern-day enslavement. Over 40,000 school-age young people every day are incarcerated, and we spend $25 million a day locking up young people. $25 million a day. So let's go to the next slide, please. So the question, which has more influence on student achievement? Is it the in-school factors, out-of-school factors? I gave this away. It's out of school, but I would say next slide, please. And the research makes clear it's actually both. We have to focus on in-school and out of school simultaneously. We have been narrowly obsessed with the in-school, the blue, pretty much our entire history as a country as we think about education policy or even how we conceive policy, right? The out of school, the hard work, the structural, systemic work, we have largely ignored in Congress and state houses and at the local and community level. So now's the time to change that. Next slide, please. Our childrencan'twait.com and our center highlights a lot of the themes of our book. But just to give you a sneak preview, and we're going to get more into these themes a little bit here. In our book, Our Children Can't Wait, we talk about connections across issues like we typically do not make in policy. We talk about the history of slavery and discrimination and how it shapes policy today. How we can establish a National Children's Commission, focus on air quality and getting students far away from harmful neurotoxicants, removing school resource officers from school, using Medicaid funding in new ways, even making integration for schools and communities a part of a new federal right to education. Now, these are a lot of big ideas as you're sitting here trying to process them with me, but each chapter has federal, state, and local policy recommendations. And President Pringle, who you're going to hear from momentarily, Representative Mariana Rosa, and Dr. Simon are going to translate some of these big ideas for you. In a similar way, though, I'd be remiss if I didn't try to offer some immediate recommendations today for us to consider as we jump in. Next slide, please. Thanks, Caitlin. Okay. First bullet, please tell your story. I know we hear this a lot. As LFA members, as educators, yes, tell my story. But I think we still have to do it. We have to still tell our stories through op-eds on social media to our friends, our neighbors, our students, our parents, about the impact of policies on students, staff, schools, and the profession at every level of government. And I hope you use this book as a model for changes you'd like to see in school and out of school. Number two, we need to work with partners to push for changes to governance, how we budget, and policy authority between labor partners, LFA affiliates, state boards, state departments of education, governors, legislatures, higher ed, and community groups to support more intersectional, cross-agency, cross-sector work, guided by data systems and research. And when we do our research, we can't ignore issues of race or have a colorblind approach to how we think about our research. We need to work with state affiliates to send our work on education as a vehicle to dismantle systemic racism, not to codify or reinforce inequities. We need to advocate for more policy tables. I mentioned this in passing earlier for students, educators, and community members to drive policy priorities. We have informal and formal policy structures we need to reconsider. And the big idea from this conversation today is really in the book is that we are all policymakers, but we have to recognize our own power. We need to do that starting with our students, with our young people, to help them think of themselves in new and ways they didn't even imagine. For classroom teachers, site administrators, community members, to understand that they are policymakers and they are setting policy every day, every minute of the day, whether or not they call it that. And now is their time to redefine what policy is to them. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to shift over now to President Pringle, again, who wrote the foreword of the book. And Becky, would love to get from your perspective for NEA members and Learning First Alliance members, how we translate some of these big ideas in this moment.
So, Joe, I must begin by thanking you for allowing me the opportunity to write the foreword to this really important work. I am also a big fan, and I appreciate that you have taken the time to not only do the research, but actually put pen to paper and talk about policies, education policies through powerful prose and really good arguments, Joe, about why our children can't wait. I am so pleased to join the other members of this panel today for this important discussion. Joe, you've heard me say this in some form or another throughout our long tenure as colleagues and as friends. But when I became the president of NEA, I taught science for 31 years, middle level learners. And when I was honored to become president 3 years ago, I articulated a vision for the NEA that we would not only unite NEA, our NEA members, our 3 million members, but the entire nation to reclaim public education as a common good, as the foundation of our democracy. But Joe, you and I know, and our Learning First Alliance partners know, we can't stop there. We can't. We actually have to transform it into something it was never designed to be: a racially and socially just and equitable system that prepares every student, everyone, to succeed in a diverse and interdependent world. And that's, I believe, how we will ensure the joy of learning and and brilliance and excellence, creativity and promise of our students, and to ensure that they are seen and supported and nurtured throughout their learning journey, and as they take those next steps into higher education, into the world of work, into being those educated citizens who have the skills to think critically. We certainly know how important that is in our world today. But not only that, to collaborate in solving the very wicked problems that they will inherit and that will exist for them as they take their rightful place as the leaders of a just society. So Joe, there are a number of themes in the book that reflect that vision for me. I could talk about the whole book, but I just want to focus in on two chapters 4 and 6, particularly because in those spaces, you talk about dismantling systemic racism and inequities. And we know that when we talk about structural racism, and it is across every social system in this country, that result in inequities that we know impact our students, our students of color. They impact our students with disabilities. They impact our LGBTQ plus students in a disparate way. And so we know that, and you make the argument for reinventing public education policy and how critical and foundational that is to move us toward that vision of a racially and socially just public education system. One major takeaway that is threaded throughout Our Children Can't Wait is that educators, students, families, and communities all have shared priorities and shared responsibility, quite honestly. We want our schools to be these wonderful places of learning that are safe, equitable, just, inclusive, future-focused spaces, which you talk about, where students and families are comfortable and they trust that their safety in every meaning of the word of that word, beginning with the safety from gun violence to the safety of our students being allowed to be their authentic selves. So every meaning of that word, safety. We want our schools to be the hubs of the community. That's why NEA has fought so hard for the community schools model, which we know is a proven strategy for not only student success, honestly, but the success of the entire community. And we've invested and lobbied for millions of dollars in supporting schools in our communities to be transformed in community schools, where the school can focus on the whole child and on their family. Another key theme is a sense of urgency. Just in the title, we get that, right? That all of these issues require. A good bit of the work that NEA focuses on, that Linda Darling-Hammond and Shauna May Cook talk about in their chapter on developing policy for the whole child. We've been actually pursuing universal school meals for many, many years. And thanks to the Biden administration's efforts, we are closer than we've ever been. We're not where we need to be. So we'll continue that fight, because we know our kids can't learn if they're hungry. They also can't learn if they don't have a place to live. All of those things impact our students' ability to come to school ready to learn every day. We've also been doing work around the connection between academic, social, and emotional learning. And I've been grateful to be a part of the Science of Learning and Development Alliance that LPI spearheads. And that at NEA, we are continuing to build those supports for educators to be able to focus on social and emotional learning. We know, certainly coming out of this pandemic, how important that is and how it connects to academic learners. So when we talk about closing gaps, it's all of them. it's all of them individually and together. And it's also important to understand that we have to focus on those people who have dedicated their lives to educating this nation's children. We have to focus on their social and emotional intelligence and their social and emotional health as well. And we're leading efforts to make sure that educators are equipped with the tools and the know-how so they can advocate for physically safer environments, from indoor air quality to clean water to green spaces for students to learn. Every single one of these issues is critical to ensuring that our students have the freedom to learn, and educators have the freedom to teach, so that our children have access to honest, complete history of this country, and they do that learning in those safe, just, and equitable, inclusive, healthy learning environments. Another key takeaway, Joe, is that I've been saying that NEA has actually been centering for years, and you said this in your last statement that last bullet. Educators are policymakers, whether it's that educators are serving in those positions. Hundreds of NEA members were elected to positions, elected positions from school boards to members of Congress. Which is absolutely important, but they also need to be trained to develop policy, whether they're in those positions or not. So they are policy makers. Education policy shouldn't be crafted by those who haven't spent a day in our classrooms. They should be crafted by educators along and in partnership with our parents and community members and those who care about our kids. That's something we know. As educators, we are the ones who are closest to our students, so we should not only be at the table and in the discussions, but we should be valued members of those the participants in those final decisions that are made around education policies. When you're reading, our children can't wait. Educators, I know as they read this book, they will clearly and proudly see their work embedded throughout this very, very impactful book, not only in the chapters that I highlighted, but across the entirety of Our Children Can't Wait. Thank you so much, Joe, for doing this work and for doing the podcast and making sure that people know about the work and actually implementing those strategies and recommendations that you laid out. Thank you.
President Pringle, honored to call you a friend and colleague, and you've been talking about these issues your entire career. So this is not new, but I think the question is, how do we make this new and relevant, and how do we make these issues something that we all feel a deep responsibility for, not just a former Pennsylvania educator, still educator today, now leading the largest union in the country. So let's shift from Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., back to the West Coast. Let's go to Dr. Simon and Becky. I'm gonna come back to you once we go through to Dr. Simon and State Rep Mariana Rosa with some follow-up questions. But Dr. Simon is the president of the Association of California School Administrators. She's an assistant sup in Long Beach. We started working together on the issue of students experiencing homelessness, and she's been a champion for young people her entire career, and has always been a policymaker. But I've learned a lot from Dr. Simon, and you will as well, as she translates some of these big ideas really for more site and school system leaders to think about where do we go from here? And I see some of these questions already surfacing in the chat box. Where do we go from here? Dr. Simon.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. Let me just say first, Ms. Becky Pringle, thank you so much. I think she already just laid the foundation just for each of us to either add on, to snap, to clap, but to also just piggyback on what was just stated. I mean, that was just stated very eloquently and perfectly. So thank you for that opening. I too, like Ms. Pringle, I'm a huge fan of Dr. Bishop's work. I have a huge appreciation for him having the courage to be just that daring leader, that daring researcher, to address and center our most vulnerable and marginalized youth. As Dr. Bishop said, we have a history of working together on homeless issues, foster issues, And I have the honor and privilege of working with him just based on some work that AXA is doing to address systemic racism alongside some of our affinity groups as well. I mean, I will say this, healthy schools are usually found in healthy communities. I think we can see that. We know there's a huge intersectionality of how it is difficult for students to thrive in environments. And the book touches on this, where there's high crime, where the social, emotional, and physical and physiological well-being of our students is not there. But what I like about Dr. Bishop's book is that I think we've all come to this notion that we just can't rely on policies that highlight academic achievement if we're going to close the opportunity gaps and really disrupt systemic racism within our schools, within our district, within our communities. We must look at several other factors, right? Such as social emotional learning, mental health and trauma. We have to equally prioritize that with academic achievement as well. Homelessness, the experiences of our foster youth. And what I like about this book is that it clearly lays out just the case of how this comprehensive policy or comprehensive policy approaches that focuses on housing, health, segregation, environmental justice, that are the critical and missing components, right, to addressing systemic racism and inequities in education. So as I'm speaking to administrators, and I do want to say this, as we're talking about systemic racism and equity, these are not buzzwords, y'all. These are words that have been deeply rooted in educational systems for the past hundreds of years. The data is clear. The data does not lie in regards to how our students are suffering. The education that they were promised has not been fulfilled. And we have to take deeper dives and reflect and look at ourselves and say, hey, have we done all of our children justice? Are all the children well? And let me just tell you straight up, no. As the AXA state president, with my travels throughout the state and throughout other states, in my current work in the district, working with communities, no, our children are not well. Let me just say some of our adults are not well as well. I'll put that in that mix as well. But a few things I want administrators to really take away from Dr. Bishop's amazing book. You must know the communities in which you serve. I think it's hugely important that you canvass the communities, and I'm really speaking to principals, right? Because you are the mini mayor in so many words of your community. You have to understand the community in which you are serving, which you are a principal of. Have conversations with parents, and not just parents or caretakers, but also business owners, clergy. Truly understand the social determinants that are within the communities you serve: economic stability, education access and quality, healthcare access and quality, neighborhoods, and the built environments, right? Gentrification, our students are in families being forced to leave. What are some of the barriers and issues? And then the social and community context that is within, right, that school community as well. And Mrs. Pringle brought this up as well. Listen to your students, and Dr. Bishop, listen to your students and your families. They have a long history of things that have happened within that community. They can help inform, right, certain programs, certain aspects within your school that you may not even have any knowledge about. Ensure they are heard, seen, and valued. Value their stories. Value the things they've gone through. Reform the way discipline is handled. We gotta look at our discipline policies, y'all. If we look at the data, we're having conversations about willful defiance. We're looking at that data and seeing how many students of color are being suspended at significantly higher numbers, right, than other peers. We're not addressing trauma that is happening within communities. We're not addressing cultural differences that are happening in communities. We have to have these deep conversations if we're going to know and learn and understand our students and the communities in which they come from. I will say this as my last remark, Dr. Bishop. We cannot dismantle systemic racism in silos. We have to work together. We have to work with other agencies. And this is something that ACSA has taken very seriously with our work with Dr. Joseph Bishop, because we are stronger together. There is a sense of urgency. Dr. Bishop addresses this in his book. Our children can't wait any longer for just and righteous policies to give them equitable academic access. We have to work together to force the issue, to build coalitions, to demand that our students have access. Just the simple things that can help them move forward and thrive. We have to move at a faster pace. And this is something that I always remind my ACSA counterparts and many others. I don't care the type of shoe that you like. I'm a Nike fan. I love Jordans. I even love red bottoms. Doesn't matter. Whatever is your preference, stay in those shoes and run and move at a faster pace for students, because they are counting. They are counting on us to help them thrive and fulfill the promise of education, of life, and many other aspects moving forward. Thank you for your time, Dr. Bishop.
Thank you, Dr. Simon. The truth tellers have arrived. Beware. So President Pringle, Dr. Simon, now we're going to shift to former Minnesota State House Representative and Executive Director of the Minnesota Educational Equity Project, the Honorable Carlos Mariana Rosa. And Carlos is somebody who I've known over a decade. We started working together when I was at the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials. And Carlos has always been a leader among leaders, but he's one of the most thoughtful people you will ever encounter. And he just so happens to be somebody who served as a state lawmaker and had this, I think, really unique insight running a nonprofit and also working in the legislature and seeing the perspectives of community members and kind of more traditional policy spaces and trying to bridge these worlds together. And that's why I really wanted Representative Mariana Rosa to come and speak with you about, for lawmakers, how do we do policy differently? State Rep, take it away.
All right, we can do that in 6 or 7 minutes. Hey, thank you. Thank you to the Learning Alliance, to NEA, to my friend, Dr. Joe Bishop, for the opportunity to share a few words with you today. Dr. Simon, get down. Can't dismantle systemic racism in silos. I mean, that really was the benefit, has been the benefit of the work that I do here at the Minnesota Education Equity Partnership, while also serving as a legislature, that I always showed up at the Capitol understanding for my work here that this whole thing about silos is like, quite honestly, close to a sin, in terms of directing, shaping, limiting what we can do. I do want to start by sharing some very quick good news, which is last week, our governor, after the legislature acted, signed universal free school meals. And it created a powerful opportunity to have a conversation, much like this one, which was focused on the purpose of education, as opposed to the culture war, class war conversation about who deserves, who should get, who shouldn't get. So there's incredible power in these kinds of conversations. Racial injustices are at the crossroads of all the out of school factors that you've identified, Joel. Poverty, alienation, marginalization. And so I really welcome this work as a call to exercise our duty and our power for creating and implementing, education policies that holistically tie students' personal well-being with their academic success. We can't say it often enough of just the intimate interaction reality of those dynamics, because they're true in the world of students. And so this whole idea, it seems to me, of creating systems in which our goal is to either fix the students or fit them into some conventional box somehow is, the antithesis, in my opinion, of what education should be about, which is about the self-actualization of human beings to empower themselves to live the lives they want to live in goodness and community with others. And so often, as I chaired education committee, as I heard education bills, had discussions, it was a lot of work to drive the conversation to get back focused on that particular purpose. I think I was asked to comment on 5 things legislators can take away from this collection, this powerful product that Joe produced. And let me try to run through them really quickly. One is that it's as a legislator, and this has to do with that urgency and not waiting kind of thing, that we don't need to create a whole new body of technical knowledge and social interventions for addressing students' social needs tied to delivery of education, of learning opportunities. There's always work to be developed. There's always new things to learn, but we can't just sit here and wait, to do the technical explorations and write-ups and discussions. There's plenty of empirical evidence on the ground of precisely where these two, quote unquote, two worlds are coming together in ways that are helpful for students. So the real question is, what are we waiting for, right? We heard that already. 2, that we should work, therefore, to intentionally design schools centered on playing a coordinating role, at the very least, for bringing these 2 realities together and to rethink and change the numerous ways in which each of our present social interventions are also limited by policies that get in the way of them collaborating with our schools. We all know all the data privacy challenges of whether housing or community corrections, criminal justice related to sharing valuable information with our educators. We spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. And all we're trying to figure out is the technical legal aspects. We're not really figuring out what just simply needs to be commonly understood and known and respected so that we can help today, not later, the student that's wrestling with any of those issues. We need to nurture wisdom. I know that sounds like, oh, okay, duh, I need to nurture wisdom, but I think what that really means is that we need to create opportunities to build new relationships and processes within those new relationships for wise reflections on how state policies can contribute to nurturing human beings through collective action. So much of work that happens in the legislature, unfortunately, tends to be really piecemeal, disconnected, and flowing strictly from one group of really smart, maybe even really good folks, but not always from a community effort. We need to ask the big questions, the systems questions, the structures questions, the culture questions. And we need to do that while always engaging. And I saw someone in the chat through this ed, always engaging with students, with their relations, with their communities, and doing so in culturally validating ways. Not in ways in terms of, look, here's how it's going to go down. Here's how you talk. Here's how you think. You got valuable stuff, but it's only going to work if you talk like I talk. That's contrary to good public policy. And then finally, to understand that an effective policy frame for our nation simply cannot exist if it doesn't make sense to people of color and indigenous people. That's who we are. That's our moment in history. We need to know as legislators that people of color and indigenous people change everything about our society. They change the key assumptions upon which we have conventionally built this society. And so to accept that, to understand that, to welcome that, and to embrace that is part of this agenda here. We're not going to get to where we need to get to only through a technical exercise, even though we need all the technicians. I would often bring psychometricians and attorneys and school administrators together with immigrant parents, with students, with undocumented students into the same room. And guess what? They held their own in those conversations and they created things, powerful things together. It was then my job and the job of my colleagues to translate those into statutory proposals in our state. So much more to say, but I'll stop there. Thank you, Joel, for this work. Thank you for all the folks, to all the folks that you brought together to share in a collective way a powerful vision. It's not new, but there is a newness here. There's the freshness of calling on calling on us to build our capacity to deconstruct policy related to what is human and what is good from our perspective. So thank you.
Carlos, thank you so much. You covered a lot for us to think about, but what struck me in particular, opening this up to the panel, you use the word, so nurture wisdom, or the phrase nurture wisdom. And the question I have to pivot back to Becky is to think about how do we nurture wisdom and trust in traditional policy settings, and if you're a classroom teacher, for example, because my sense, in Carlos, I'm sure could speak to this, but when you're in the State House, people want to know how many bills did you pass? How does this relate to me? Oftentimes there's kind of this transactional nature of why should I vote for you? What have you done? What have you done for me? So how do we build that trust and nurture new ways of thinking about policy between, say, more traditional education settings and traditional policy settings?
Oh, now if we have the answer to that question, Dr. Bishop. Here's the thing. You heard this from Dr. Simon. You heard it from Representative Rosa. There were some lots of common things, but one of the things I want to emphasize, to kind of lay the foundation for my answer, is that both of them, along with me, talked about the interconnection of everything.
Yeah.
And that includes the people. I talk a lot about shared responsibility. As an educator, I knew I couldn't do what I needed to do for every one of my students by myself. I needed to have that collective wisdom of the community there with me. I needed to have the educator who taught across the hall from me. I needed to have the expertise of the support staff who work in our buildings and care and nurture our students. I needed to have administrators like Dr. Simon who respect and honor educators as the professionals they are, and give them the space and the support so that they can do what they must do as professionals: continue their learning, find space for them to collaborate in their practice, and make sure that they have the time and they have the tools to work directly with parents, our natural allies. This whole thing about dividing teachers and parents, that's beyond ridiculous. And it's just you know what it is, stoking chaos and all of the things we know is happening right now, and confusion. But our parents are natural allies. And so when you think about trust and wisdom, for me, it is about creating those spaces to come together in a powerful way. And Dr. Simon, something else I wanted to lift up from what you shared with us, because this is so important and something we always have to remember. And that is, how do we create the space for our students' voices to be heard? You know, when we think about centering our work in racial, particularly in racial justice, but in racial and social justice writ large, we know that every movement, you know, everyone, we can go back as far as you can go in time, but the more recently, you know, certainly our civil rights movement, that was led by youth, right? We have got to give them the space to do that. I just was in Florida. That's a whole webinar by itself. But anyway, I was just in Florida with the students who are leading the movement on March for Our Lives. And we are continuing, you know, they continue to say, we're not done yet. And here we have another shooting since the time I left Florida. Because they understand that that as adults in this system, we have to provide the support and the space for their agency in this moment and in every moment. So I wanted to lift that up, Dr. Simon. I could not agree more. All of that is connected to having that trust and the wisdom we know is absolutely needed in this moment. And connected to the work that you have done, Joe. And I'll end here. That until we do that, then our students, our babies, will not see us stepping up for them. We absolutely must let them know that we see them and we hear them. They are depending on us to be worthy of them.
They are depending on us to be worthy of them. I think that should have been the title, President Pringle. But no, honestly, that's kind of the thesis for this whole conversation today. And when you think about, as I'm following the chat box, I'm going to shift to Dr. Simon and then Rep Mariana Rosa to wrap up, and then to Dr. Long. But so I'm reading in the chat box this idea of a whole child sometimes becomes whole incoherence. And I'm wondering, how do we connect these big ideas that adults sometimes have really good intent, and then we create all these structures that actually confuse or sometimes create major obstacles that we didn't intend to create. So Dr. Simon, how do we create really whole coherent child system? Maybe I should change the order of that. As if I were writing, I'd change the order of that. But what do we do?
I mean, I think we've been speaking about this in regards to centering students, hearing their voices, hearing some of the issues, some of the barriers that are present in their lives, some of the issues that permeate, their communities, their families, school sites. We as adults, I think always, in so many cases, I won't say all adults, but have good intentions for students. Educators should have good intentions for students. Associations, whether it's for teachers, classified members, good intentions, for students, to be made whole, to be successful, to thrive. I think sometimes we just lack voices, It's a conversation that we have sometimes with legislators, before you put pen to paper. Sometimes bring in communities, bring in educators to have conversations around policies that are being written. Sometimes the best intentions, but sometimes they are hurtful, to systems, and sometimes to students unintentionally. And I think for us, I think Pringle just hit it again. we have to take into account and listen to voices. We have to ensure that our folks are being heard and seen, and truly understanding the issues that are prevalent within systems. And that means reaching out to you, Dr. Bishop at UCLA, reaching out to, I'm going to put it like this, your crosstown rival, school site, campus, many other institutions and universities, to have conversations, researchers who know how to delve into this work and know how to have conversations and build systems within schools. We have to step out of ourselves and stop thinking that we are the only ones with knowledge or the experts. We have to reach out and have conversations with others, especially our students, our parents, and our communities. They understand too deeply what is happening, what is the issues that are rooted within those communities. So to make a long story short, we got to communicate. We got to stop working in silos, and we got to bring the voices that need to be heard into the conversation if we truly want to make an impact for our students.
Thank you, Dr. Simon and Representative Mariana Rosa. So before we close out, wondering if you could leave us with some thoughts that you have today after this conversation. It's either reaffirming or maybe have some new insights.
Yeah, well, thank you. There's so much here. We repeatedly hear how new voices need to be heard, need to be part of the conversation when decisions are being made. I think we need that, and I think we need to be intentional beyond that. And by that, what I mean is that I think we need to commit ourselves to helping others build capacity to understand current policies, the science of policies, how they work, and how they can be moved around, reshaped in really creative ways that reflect their realities. We, a few years ago at MNEP, we worked a project when ESSA was created. Every state needed to file an implementation plan. Department of Ed asked us to hold conversations with EML, emerging multilingual communities, for their advice on centering accountability for EL, quote unquote EL students. And so we did that. We met with 5, 6, 7 different types of language groups, Hmong, Somali, Oromo, Spanish, etc., speaking folks, and parents for the most part. And we were worried. We walked through this process of explaining this big federal accountability system. And, it didn't take long. We were like over-worrying this stuff. These parents knew exactly, what that framework, how it worked once we walked through it. They knew where the soft points were, where the weak points were. They knew where they can assert their values and what they wanted because they know what they want. And so for us at the end, it was a lot of note taking and then translating into technical, jargon, what these parents wanted, but the capacity was off the chart. And we can continue to build capacity with that community of folks and with others as well. So I do think we have an opportunity here, and I think Joe's book calls for this, to deconstruct policy, rebuild it, and rebuild it precisely by having all sorts of new people doing that design work, and by creating engagements and processes that allow them the time and the space to be able to translate into their own realities what the current policy frames are doing or most likely not doing, and then having that safe, empowering environment to say, this is what we want. What does that look like now in terms of a policy frame? This is how I chaired my committees. We brought in all sorts of voices that were typically not up at the Capitol. It was not surprisingly incredibly racially and gender, culture, and age diverse, and no one had seen that before. And right now, our legislature is building off of that kind of work that myself and others, who are approaching policy from a different way. So building our capacity on policy development, there's incredible power there for us. And it really does hinge on bringing all sorts of new people into that, roll up your sleeve, get your elbows dirty, type of work of translating policy or translating the realities into technical policy.
State Rep, policy is a dynamic process. So we need you to train every legislator in this country to think about policy in a different way. Now that you're not in the state house, if you could go on the road, that would be terrific. Thank you to this incredible panel of friends, colleagues. I'm so grateful that you made time considering all that's on your plate. Dr. Rich Long, take it away to close us out. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, and the panel. This has been insightful and knitting together some really important ideas. One of the important ideas I've taken away from this is reinforcing the concept of complexity. And this is contrary to making public policy. Public policy many times is about, making a law that will change one or two variables and then it goes to the implementers. The flip model here is what you're all talking about. This is something where we need to be working together and are bringing the policy forward with all of the intricacies. I've been involved today and yesterday with 4 of the LFA members talking about these subjects across the board, teachers, administrators, counselors, and others. I invite you to join with us in how we're trying to bring up and empower educators and parents at the local level with our Here for the Kids campaign. This is where we're trying to give voice to students, to parents, to teachers, to administrators, to engage with and seek the cooperation of their communities, to be there because we're here for the kids. Joe, this has been a phenomenal hour. Your work, as always, has been inspirational and giving us a direction to move forward. Thank you.